Everything, all motion is expressed in waves. All waves are expressed in curves. It always makes spirals.
So because of the concept of gravity, and because of the concept of this event horizon, this super point of gravity, this infinite point that light can't even escape, that this exists because of the theory
their math,
of gravity.
And their math. Remember, they have a thing called zero. They go from 1 to 0 to -1. There is no zero to even think zero.
So do you think that zero is a concept that came along with currency?
So Joe Rogan has platformed some bizarre ideas on his talk show, much like the Catholic Church platformed some of Aristotle's bizarre ideas during the 1,000 years they ran Europe.
Aristotle believed that the Earth was at the center of the universe and that the planets, including the sun, revolved around us, and that the stars never moved or changed.
He also believed that fire rises because it wants to go to the heavens and rocks fall because they're trying to go back to the earth. But at a certain point, Europe learned otherwise through careful observation and moved on from Catholic and Aristotle dogma to this thing called the Enlightenment. Much like Joe Rogan listeners should move on from listening to rich people spout gobbledygook to actually reading books or touching grass. Sorry, is a cheap shot. The Catholic Church curated a certain self-serving model of reality that Europeans took for granted. When Europe started moving beyond that, they entered a period of history referred to as the Enlightenment. It's kind of a tough period to pin down since it flared up in different countries at different times, but we're generally dealing with anywhere from the mid-1600s to the early 1800s. This should be enough to cover the Enlightenment, as well as a little of what led to it and a little of what came after. No matter what time period you focus on, it represents a tremendous growth in European knowledge. Much like there comes a time to evolve beyond accepting the carefully curated range of ideas that get turbo-blasted into your brain by podcast, manosphere, and hustle culture bros on the internet, Europe had a time when they broke through the carefully curated range of ideas laid down by the Catholic Church. This is the Enlightenment. The conventional history goes something like this. Greece and then Rome built these glorious civilizations with art, philosophy, and good government. Then the Roman Empire fell in 476, leading Europe into the Dark Ages. During the Dark Ages, the Catholic Church became the hegemonic power in Europe, and all of these accomplishments from Greece and Rome were forgotten for the next 1,000 years. There are major problems with this story, and one can pretty much take issue with every single sentence in it. But there are two major truths we could pull out of this. One, by the year 1492, the Catholic Church was the most powerful institution in Europe, and two, the Greek and Roman civilizations were a long time in the past. Why was 1492 important? Because Europeans were starting to learn some new things about the world. In that year, Christopher Columbus landed in the Americas, showing Europeans that there was an entire hemisphere of human beings they didn't know about, complete with their own languages, religions, and cultures. Since those cultures didn't revolve around the Catholic religion, Columbus saw fit to enslave and genocide them.
Each history's greatest monster!
I'm not going to take the cheap shot of saying Europeans thought the world was flat, because they didn't. Finding the Americas just taught Europeans that the world was way bigger than they thought. Shortly after that, Nicholas Copernicus discovered that the sun was the center of the solar system and not the earth. This contradicted the teachings of Aristotle and the Catholic Church. Good thing Copernicus published his findings after his death because the church didn't take too kindly to people who contradicted them. And while these things were happening, educated Europeans were rediscovering all of these sweet books from ancient Greece and Rome. All of that philosophy that had been forgotten during the Dark Ages, they were cool again. It was a totally retro movement. Europeans were inspired to write, talk, and do art about ancient Greece and Rome. You can say there was a rebirth of Greek and Roman culture, or as they say in France, a renaissance. But we can't avoid talking about one other person, someone around at roughly the same time as Columbus and arguably just as important as Columbus, everyone's favorite German monk, Martin Luther. The story goes that in 1505, Martin Luther was on a boat in the middle of a violent thunderstorm. Luther interpreted this thunderstorm as the work of God, and it terrified him. He prayed that if God let him survive the storm, he'd dedicate his life to him. Martin Luther did survive, and in fact, he did end up serving God. So much so that the Catholic Church was like, "Whoa, buddy, going a little overboard there, huh?" Luther responded, "You're damn right I'm going overboard. You guys forgot what it's like to serve God. Come on my podcast and debate me in the marketplace of ideas." Luther owned the Catholic Church so hard on his podcast that they kicked him out, excommunicated him, canceled him. Typical liberal media. But in the end, there were several powerful kings in Europe who were willing to fund and protect Martin Luther, giving him the resources to restart his podcast where he would badmouth the church constantly. His followers protested the Catholic Church, which is why they were called Protestants. This caused a bunch of wars throughout Europe between the 1500s and 1600s. When all was said and done, some parts of Europe became Protestant while others remained loyal to the Catholic Church. The one institution that had united Europe for 1,000 years, the undisputed hegemon of the continent, was hegemon no more. Europe was now divided along religious lines. So this thing called the Enlightenment developed because Europe had been through some serious drama. Not only were they learning new stuff about the world, stuff that didn't necessarily agree with the stuff the church was teaching, but they also saw the church could be challenged. Martin Luther took them on and won. In short, the church wasn't as smart or as powerful as they seemed over the previous 1,000 years. Enter a French thinker named René Descartes. Descartes is considered a pre-Enlightenment thinker, someone who came before the Enlightenment but anticipated many of its major themes. Descartes asked us to imagine that we were sitting in our living rooms, eyes closed, ruminating on all of this exciting new knowledge people were learning about the world. We spent the 1,000 years thinking God put us in the center of the universe, and now we're not. We spent even longer than that thinking the whole world consisted of Europe, Asia, and Africa. But there was a whole new world out there we had no idea of. Can we know anything for sure at this point? As a good Catholic, Descartes assured us that God wouldn't deceive us. No matter how bizarre the world may seem at times, it is knowable. Philosophers call this epistemology, or the question of how we know what we know. Think, what do we know for sure? And then it hit him. Thinking. I know for sure that I am thinking. Therefore, I must exist. Hence, Descartes' famous Latin phrase, cogito ergo sum, or I think, therefore I am, meaning I know I exist because I am thinking. Now that he's figured this out, he could use it as a starting point to figure out other facts. This is what we would call deductive reasoning. Meaning if you know one thing is true, you could figure out other things that are true based upon that one thing.
In math, if I know that P equals Q and Q equals R, then P must also equal R. Let's see Terence Howard disprove that.
According to Descartes, if I exist, then I'm a thing, because things exist. And what kind of thing am I? A thinking thing, of course. However, this causes a problem. If I come up to you and tell you I'm a thing, you might agree with that. After all, you could see me, hear me, you could definitely smell me, especially after a gorgonzola bender. But if I tell you that I'm a thinking thing, how would you know that? You can't see my thoughts. You don't know if I'm actually thinking or just have a symbol monkey in my brain.
This leads Descartes to another big conclusion. We are made of two substances. The body, which is the part others can see, hear, and smell, and the mind, which is the part inside of me. The mind is the part that thinks, and the body is the part that stinks. To be clear, when Descartes said mind, he didn't mean brain. The mind has a lot more in common with a consciousness, or a soul. It's the part of us that lives forever, and joins the afterlife when our bodies cease to exist.
Like we said, Descartes was a good Catholic. He wasn't out to challenge the teachings of the church. In fact, his philosophy lends intellectual ammunition to the church, a firm foundation for the existence of God and heaven. Human beings, and in fact the entire universe, consists of two realms, the physical and the spiritual. there is a dual reality, which is why this idea is called Cartesian dualism, or the double reality explained by Descartes. Dualism is a long-standing thread in Western philosophy going back to the days of Plato, and even popping up here and there today. There are certainly problems with Cartesian dualism. For example, people who have had traumatic brain injuries sometimes forget who they are or lose the ability to think altogether. Yet they still exist. They're still alive. This means the physical world could still affect the spiritual world of my thoughts. Also, if I think about a wonderful savory mountain of gorgonzola, I might go to the store to buy some. The spiritual world of my thoughts can trigger actions in the physical world with my body. So even though there's a dual reality, one half of that reality could affect the other. This caused problems that Descartes and others after him tried to address. For example, Descartes believed that human beings have a pineal gland in their bodies that acts as a kind of gateway between the spiritual and the physical. That's why today on the weird side of the internet, you'll see people sell products or recommend medicines to cleanse or repair your pineal gland. It's supposed to bring you more in touch with the spirit world or open your third eye or whatever. For the record, don't do that. Don't mess with your pineal gland in any way, please. Now, no matter what you think about Descartes, the fact of the matter is every European thinker after him needed to deal with his ideas in some way. And then there was Francis Bacon, an English thinker who published his book The Advancement of Learning in 1605, a couple of decades before Descartes published his Meditations. If Descartes was the alpha male influencer for deductive reasoning, Bacon was the alpha male influencer for inductive reasoning. As we've seen, Descartes' use of deductive reasoning caused him to base his knowledge on the few things we can know for sure. God doesn't deceive, we exist as thinking things, etc. All of the facts of the universe logically fit together. Reality is a web whose shape we could figure out through sustained thought and reflection. Bacon didn't believe that just thinking would cut it. People needed to constantly observe the world around them. He mentioned the fact that it was the invention of the compass that helped Europeans find the Americas, greatly expanding their view of the world. People needed to constantly discover new things out in the world, not merely through logical syllogisms in their living room like Descartes. This is the idea of inductive reasoning, of following the facts wherever they might lead you. Before this, Europeans considered learning new facts as mostly a waste of time. God already revealed the universe to us through his creations and scriptures. What would learning new things do aside from giving you a few new pieces of useless trivia you could sneak into conversations? But Bacon believed that learning new things about the universe would bring us more in touch with God's creation and therefore improve our lives. Notice how both Bacon and Descartes were able to fit their new ideas into a religious society. They didn't challenge God. They were trying to make their faith in God stronger. In 1660, the English Royal Society was created where people could share new discoveries about the world. It would allow nerds to come together and share their nerd discoveries, a kind of Comic-Con for the 17th century. Bacon, along with fellow Englishman Isaac Newton, is considered one of the founding fathers of modern science, which aims to learn about the world through observation and experimentation. While Bacon and Descartes were very careful not to upset the religious establishment of their day, another thinker was not so careful, the Dutchman Baruch Spinoza. Spinoza will be the last of the Pre-Enlightenment thinkers we discuss, and probably the most controversial. Spinoza was born into a Jewish family at a time where European Jews weren't necessarily welcome with open arms. In fact, Spinoza's grandparents had to flee Portugal due to the anti-Semitic discrimination they faced there. They moved to the city of Amsterdam in modern-day Netherlands, since it had a reputation for religious tolerance. It was home to many free-thinking people, and Spinoza was one of the freest thinkers of all. In fact, he was so independent-minded that the Jewish community of Amsterdam kicked him out. This made it tough for him to support himself, but he was able to grind out a living through teaching and making lenses. but his primary love was thinking and writing. His philosophy was a throwback to the ancient Greeks and Romans, especially the Stoics. Stoics believe that you can't control what the world throws at you. You can only control how you respond to it. For example, if you catch a cold, you can't cry or be angry because stuff happens. People catch colds. That's how the world works. In order to be happy, you have to learn about how the world works and bring your behavior in line with it. Only by getting control over your emotions and letting yourself be guided by reason will you be able to find peace and happiness. Similar to Bacon, he believed in learning as much about the world as possible, inductive reasoning. However, he wanted to apply that to everything, not just the physical world of air and water and compasses and ships, but of the moral and religious world as well. He studied the Bible, especially the Old Testament, and concluded that it was written by human beings, not God or prophets possessed by God. Here is probably a hint of why Spinoza was kicked out of Amsterdam's Jewish community. It's telling that he didn't officially join any other religion either. He was a rare man without a church or a synagogue in 17th century Europe. But that doesn't mean he was a man without God. Spinoza very deftly mixed Bacon's idea of inductive reasoning with Descartes' idea of a symmetrical web of reality. Only through inductive reasoning can we figure out the shape of this web, the web that God created. Or did he create it? If someone says God created the universe, this poses a problem of who created God. The standard answer to this is that nobody created God. God is eternal. He was there and always will be there. However, Spinoza saw this as needlessly complicated. Rather than God making the universe, what if God was the universe? That way, you could avoid the messy question of where the universe came from altogether. It was always here, because God's always been here. Therefore, learning about this beautiful web of reality through inductive reasoning is literally learning about God. And learning about God will allow us to learn our proper place in that universe so that we could act according to what God requires, kind of like the ancient Stoics thought. So as you can see, Spinoza beautifully mixed all of these ideas into one elegant system. Sometimes Spinoza is called a pantheist, someone who believes God is everywhere. Many people of Spinoza's time believed he was a full-on atheist, someone who didn't believe in God at all. Indeed, in those days, being called a pantheist was just like being called an atheist. After all, it says in the Bible that God created the universe. Pantheism directly contradicts that. Furthermore, Spinoza had a way of stressing the humanity of both Jewish and Christian figures from the Bible. Moses was a human. Jesus was a human. They weren't divine or possessed by God. They were dudes. This perhaps explains why both Jews and Christians had major problems with Spinoza. Spinoza believed in the power of reason over emotion, and he believed that reason could allow us to learn how to live our best lives on earth so that we could be fulfilled. For Spinoza, it wasn't just about knowing the truth or being right. It was about using the truth to improve everyone's lives. This, perhaps, is the most important thing Spinoza contributed to the Enlightenment. Using truth to improve life on earth is perhaps the one overriding theme of every Enlightenment thinker we will address. This might seem innocent, but Europeans had been taught for centuries that life on earth was just preparation for true happiness in heaven. Earthly life was supposed to suck. This put most Enlightenment thinkers at odds with the teachings of the Church. One of the worst things an Enlightenment thinker could be called was a Spinozist, meaning a follower of Baruch Spinoza. Being called a Spinozist implied that you were an atheist, overly concerned with earthly pleasures and, very possibly, evil. Calling someone a Spinozist during the Enlightenment was like when conservatives today, like Donald Trump and Elon Musk, call someone woke. Coming from their lips, woke means something bad, and their followers interpret it that way.
With the military, we're ending woke immediately. You know, I ended woke, totally. And then they, in their first week, they reestablished it. It's crazy. They pay instructors hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. It literally, literally, they want our military to be woke. And it's just not going to happen. You read in Hawaii where they had the horrible fire where they have people going there And before they bring them on board, they have to study woke for a week. Can you believe this? In other words, everyone's wanting to get back to their home, finding the bodies. It was such a tragedy. You don't read about it too much anymore, but hell is going on over there. And they want to give them classes in essentially wokeness. Can you believe? So, you've seen it. Well, we'll end that very quickly.
In reality, what they consider woke are just basic ideas of human decency designed to stress the value of every person in society, no matter their race, gender, or sexual orientation. Now, this might sound ridiculous, but keep in mind that Musk and Trump are the ones who destroyed Sesame Street for being too woke. Being labeled woke today, or Spinoza in the 1700s, shows that people have been doing similar things throughout history, which means that we've probably always lived on the worst timeline.